Good morning. Today is July 19th, 2014, and our guest today is Dan Davidson, who tells me that he was among some of the earliest NPA presenters back, I think 1995 or 6. They had a meeting in Flagstaff, Arizona, and that may have been like the third one. Is that right? So Dan is familiar with the NPA, I guess knew John Chappell and has not been active since then, but at least has been around. He says he's been doing uh, his work in science since the 50s, so he's seen it all. His work has been in areas of understanding I guess I like to call new energy or alternative forms of energy. He's a big proponent of ether and proponent of John Keely, who he'll be talking about today. And so I've had a chance to meet him and see him present at the Tesla Tech conferences where he's probably been more active. And this is his first time to present to us with our online group here. So it's good to have him be with us here today. And Dan, if you would take a few minutes to just give us a little more of your background. I know you've been at this for a long, long time. And before you start the presentation, so we have a feel for kind of where you're coming from. And we'll let you go then. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm probably one of the geezers in this thing. I've been working on free energy since the 50s. And that was, kind of when I was in high school. Let me. Basically, I've read a couple of books back in the 50s. I lived in Georgia, South Dakota, and we were about 30 miles from Rapid City, where the big Air Force base was. It was one of the SAC bases. And, of course, the UFO stuff was happening all around the Black Hills at the time. We used to see them over Dead Man Mountain, which was just outside of Sturgis. And that got me very interested in this stuff. And I kind of had the feeling after I read some of the UFO books that there was a lot more to science that we didn't really have in that I was getting in high school. I thought the stuff was in high school was kind of Mickey Mouse. And so I figured when I got to college I was going to really learn the pure quill and how gravity and ether and all this stuff works. And I came to find out that it was more of the same thing, just a lot more detail and more rigorous aspects of the same physics I'd learned in high school and chemistry. And so I at that time I did believe in God, and I still very much do. I'm into metaphysics and stuff, but I made a prayer that I wanted to understand how the universe really functioned. And what ended up happening, it was I started meeting some very interesting people, and the doors started opening all over the place. I had a chance to work with and study with a guy named Larry Wilson, who is one of the premier experts on Keely. And I'm going to talk a little about Keely today. I got very interested in the research he was doing. Larry had actually built several devices. One was the Keely actual globe motor and several other things. He had them working. And he was doing a lot of experiments. He worked at Leer Aircraft and ended up building an anti-gravity device for Leer. And he also built, he and a guy back east built the lifters for the car anti-gravity flying saucer. And they wanted to install it, but Carr was a real nut, and he installed the lifters wrong, and of course it didn't work. But they had them working before it went to Carr stuff. So Larry was an interesting person, and his library was really fabulous. So I used to carry on a dual research, kind of going to school 100% plus. I had some spare time on Saturdays or a weekend. I'd go and see Larry and study in his library. and he never let me ever take anything out of the library. At the time I was studying yoga, the Raja Yoga, and one of the exercises in Raja Yoga was learn to discipline your mind. So I used to memorize all my college stuff, and so I memorized the Larry Wilson stuff that I read on the different things. So what happened was is over there on a Saturday, memorize a bunch of stuff, and then I'd go home and write it all down in notes. And this happened over several years. So I got quite an education, kind of a dual Orthodox education plus an unorthodox education. So what I want to talk about today is some interesting things about Keely, John Keely, and this is kind of a brief snapshot of what I'm doing right now. I've made a lot of progress over the years, and probably in the last 15 years I've made more progress than the whole 45 years beforehand. The ether is really the interface between the causal level, which I call the I am, and in Hindu philosophy it's called the Atma. This is the highest spiritual level that we're aware of on down there. And etheric is the energetic interface between that and our physical level. Now the physical level includes a lot of things, and our various forces actually come out of it. We'll talk about that today. Term ether, but I put an A in front of it to distinguish it from the that used to be used way back then. Basically, the ether is God's basic substance. It exists throughout the universe, and all things are made of it. And I want to focus today on the structure of the outer universe that is interfaces with the etheric realm, and put a light touch on the causal or inner spiritual aspect. So we'll zip on here. Current philosophy, of course, as most of us realize, is largely stuck in the physical level, and because of this, a lot of scientists are atheists and that sort of thing, but I've found that we've really conquered the physical. I don't see a lot of progress in physics since the 50s. In fact, when I studied physics back then, I really saw that there hadn't been a lot of changes since the early 1900s and Einstein and all of that. You all probably know that the physicists that threw out the ether back in Michelson-Morley experimental stage. But we're bumping into the, I think, what I'd call the barrier between the physical level and the next level. All of our semiconductor technologies, we're studying subatomic physics with these big colliders and stuff. Mechanics is largely perfected. We have, really nice cars and airplanes and things like that, but it's still based on early 50s and 60s technology. So what we really need to do in science is to move on to the understanding of the relationships of the physical, etherical, and the causal. And if we want to get any significant progress in free energy or gravity control and advanced healing modalities, etc., we're going to have to move on to these levels, because that's where it's all at. In the outer universe, nebulas form and they're evolved out of the ether, and most of this occurs at the causal level. And as this nebulas coalesce, we get more and more concentrations of the space energy. any of you are kind of confused as to where you're at, you're here on Earth, and we're here sitting in. This is a kind of an artist description of the galaxy, and you're out here on a thin arm about halfway out on the galaxy. So I don't know if this is a primitive area of the galaxy or what, but we're certainly on a primitive planet from what I can see. Ether and consciousness. This thing seems to be jumping on me. I guess it worked right. John Keely was a metaphysician and he was trained by his grandfather. He lived with his grandfather because when his grandfather come to America, Keely's parents had died, and he had to take care of John. And John's grandfather was a musician from the Baden-Baden Orchestra in Germany, I believe it was. And so he trained Keely in the violin and several other instruments. And Keely, loved the music and that sort of thing. And Keely had an accident in the lab. Well, actually in the house. He was screwing around with sound and water and things. And he had an explosion and it threw him in the hospital for about 3 months. And he realized when he started analyzing this that this small amount of water that he had in musical instruments had actually caused the explosion. And so he spent several years till he got to the point where he could convert water into pure energy. And he found certain frequencies that work with this and was able to generate them. It's actually up in the ultrasonic range. And this was later verified. I ran across a physicist when I was in the Bay Area. This guy was a consultant to Livermore Labs across the hill from where he lived, and maybe a few miles from where I live. So I've gone over and saw him a couple of times, and it turned out he had about 4 PhDs. He had a PhD in a couple areas of physics and also a PhD in electrical engineering, and maybe he had one in chemistry, I'm not sure. Anyway, the guy, I was telling him about Keely one day when I'd gone to visit him and the association experiment. And the guy said, wait, stop. So he took me out to the garage and he pulled down a box and it was full of notebooks that he took on various things that he was experimenting with. And he pulled open this notebook and showed it to me. And what he was doing, he had a contract with one of the wine firms up in the Napa Valley. And what they were interested in was pulling out certain chemicals out of the wine to make it taste better. If you're into wine or anything or analysis of that sort of thing, there are certain chemicals in the wine that don't make it taste very good. I'm not a wine drinker, but that's what I've been told. So anyway, this guy had this contract, his physicist, and he came up with the idea of using fractional sound waves and standing waves to be able to suck off the bad chemicals. It turns out that the chemicals various chemicals have various atomic weights, and if you set up a standing wave with some wine, what will happen is that the chemicals in the wine will stratify, and his theory was that he would be able to pull off the bad chemicals, and he was modeling this. He had a quartz tube about 1.5 inches in diameter and about 10 inches high, and he put an ultrasonic transducer on it. It was a barium titanate transducer. And what happened, he started running the experiment in what he thought was the range, which is around 30 to 50 kilohertz. And he was going up the scale and keeping track, and he was watching he had a feedback on this tube to tell when he was in resonance, because as this transducer heated up the wine would distill off and effervesce off of the standing wave. So by putting a feedback loop in the experiment, he was able to tell when the wine would be in resonance. And if it started going to resonance, then he'd have to feedback into his signal generator and be able to keep the standing wave going on regardless of what the level of the wine was. And he had water in his first test, and he was going up the scale and writing down the frequencies in any observation he made. And he had just written down an observation, and of course this was into the experimental ways. And he looked up, and the water was gone from the tube. So he looked around on the lab table, and there was no water there. It was, still nice and dry. And he looked up at the ceiling. He figured, well, it caused cavitation pulse and threw it up on the ceiling. And he looked at the ceiling. There was a hole in the ceiling. So he got himself up on the lab table, and he looked at the ceiling and in through the roof, and he could see daylight outside. So it kind of scared the hell out of him. And he realized that somehow or another he had created an energy soliton, and luckily it was pointed up. It didn't cause an explosion, and it scared him so bad. He's a nuclear physicist, so he wrote down what he'd seen, and he wrote down the frequencies. Well, it turned out that the frequency was within 0.5% of what Keely said the frequency was. So, Keely's back there in the 1800s, and the ability to measure frequency and stuff was pretty primitive back then, and probably an estimation by Keely. So it was an amazing thing to actually have corroboration of what had happened to Keely's stuff. So Keely started experimenting back then in the 1800s. And he had the idea that our physical bodies are resonant tuned systems to the universe's basic structures. And he developed, based on his research, what he called an atomic disintegrator and a couple other things that was modeled after the functional acoustic operation of the heart. He came to the conclusion that a lot of the various physical organs that we have in our body are acoustical in operation. He had also, he was experimenting with found out that the ether could control gravity. And he modeled, made a small model, a couple about a foot or two in diameter. This is the picture floats on the internet. It's really not Keely's platform. It was just a little lab demonstration device they used to fly around in the lab. And he showed that the ether, in a certain manner, when directed through matter, would cause anti-gravity, against the gravity force, not an anti-gravity force per se. And Keely, being a trained violinist, demonstrated various of these physical feats that he was coming up with, and was able to get some funding from Clara Bloomfield Moore, who ended up writing a biography of Keely in the later years. And he was able to convert water in his first experiments, and later he was able to convert rocks and other substances to pure etheric energy. But he used mostly hydrogen and stuff to power his craft. His little levitation craft it had a number of discs on it. He said it used to take him 3 months to get these discs tuned. And this was because of the technology they had back then. And he said he would put like 27 quarts of hydrogen into each one of these discs. He had some way of infusing the metal of the discs with hydrogen. And hydrogen, being a simple atom, is easy to run the ether through and do some stuff with it. But he was able to also, in his latter years, do rock. And one of the demonstrations he did, and this was written up, all this stuff was written up in the newspapers by various reporters, by the way, which was in Leary's notes that he had done on research. And Keely had announced that he would walk into a court in a big mountain there near Philadelphia mountains there outside of town at a certain time during the day. And of course, he had a bunch of reporters and people there interested in what he was doing because he was always good for some copy. And he said he was standing there with this thing that looked like a watch. He had actually reduced the disintegrator to the size of a watch he could carry around in his pocket. And based on his analysis, he announced to the audience, reporters and people who were there, he says at exactly, such and such a time, I'm going to walk 20 feet to that rock mountain. He did a couple of adjustments on this size disintegrator, and he turned it on and walked 20 feet straight into this rock mountain, and all of the rock vapor, rock was disintegrated right in front of him, and he just walked right into it. This is one of the wild things that he was able to demonstrate. He had this disc craft. The disc craft itself had discs mounted as in a horizontal manner, and a set of discs aimed in the vertical. He would dampen out certain keys or play certain keys on this little keyboard, and it would energize the discs for up and down and going forward and backward. And he demonstrated this before the War Department. This is another thing in the newspapers at the time. And he was at this, well, I guess probably kind of like a football or a baseball field. And the people from the Pentagon, it wasn't the Pentagon back then, it was the War Department. They had a bunch of personnel generals there watching this thing. And Keely announced what he was going to do. So he sat at the keyboard and played a couple of notes, and this little craft lifted about 6 inches off the ground. And he hit a couple other keys, and it shot down the whole length of this field at about 500 miles an hour. And then he swung it around and went back to his original starting point. And he asked the generals what they thought, and they said, well, this is very good, but this is no good with infantry or anything like that. We can't see any use for it. And that was the end of the whole thing. He also demonstrated an etheric cannon. Some of these are pictures of the etheric cannon, I think, in one of the books that I've written in the past. But the etheric cannon, actually, he could control the ether to the point where he could store it and then release it or use it in whatever way he wanted. And the etheric cannon would just shoot a projectile with normal just standard lead weight or something, I suppose. And he would release etheric force at a high pressure into this thing, and it would shoot the cannon off.
Okay, just right, and I can hear it now.
Anyway, this
right.
all of the stories got that Keely was a fraud. Happened with a 2-ton sphere. And this is a rather interesting story. The picture was in the Scientific American back at that time, in the late 1800s. Sphere weighed about 2 tons, and of course they assumed it was all compressed air. Well, compressed air technology back then, if he had done that, he was already 50 years ahead of compressed air technology. And there was no way he could really analyze this, because these so-called tubes he had in the lab were wires. And the wires actually conducted etheric force. They were special kind of wires that were made out of silver, gold, and platinum, combined in a special wire. And of course, this Bloomfield Moore, 200 stuff. How this story had come about, if the Scientific American had done their research, this happened at the Philadelphia, I think it was the Philadelphia Inquirer, had said to editor had needs some more copy to fill in to finish the newspaper up for the next day. And so he sent this young cub reporter up to get some more copy on Keely. Keely was always good for a few stories. So the young reporter went into the lab, and here was Keely standing over a big hole in the lab floor, and he had this big sphere sitting on the lab floor, and he asked Keely, he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I'm getting rid of some old equipment here that I don't need anymore." You know, he found ways of controlling ether a lot better than when he started out. So he hooked one of these wires to this big sphere, and he hooked the other end to a strange contraption he had on a belt that was hanging off of his stomach. And the contraption had some knobs on it, and Keely stood there and made a couple adjustments on this device that is on the belt, and seemed to concentrate for a few seconds, and the big sphere lifted off the lab floor. And Keely then went over and pushed this big sphere over the hole that he pulled up the floorboards in the lab. And then Keely stepped back and he made a couple of adjustments on the device on his belt. And this big sphere sunk down into the ground. And then he made a couple more adjustments, and the sphere sunk way into the ground, so it was below the level of the floorboards. And that's the real story of what happened with that 2-ton sphere. So Keely covered up the hole, and the reporter got his story and published it, and that's where all that came from. It was rather an interesting thing of what Keely did. Keely was probably 150, 200 years ahead of his time. Here's a picture of the old boy. And his first big disintegrator was the one back here on the wall. Let's see, what's out of my pointer? That's a disintegrator. And it happens also that there was a liberator here on the table. I don't quite remember what the heck that was for. If you look here at the thing, there's a few other things here. Here's some kind of a discs apparatus with some resonators. They use resonators a lot with tubes in them. And these are solid resonators that are built around this on the disintegrator. And this thing, we have some detailed pictures. At least Larry had detailed pictures. I don't know if there's any floating around. But this has some resonators also in it. They were basically acoustic resonators. And what Keely did was he was able to demonstrate higher frequencies by using harmonics. Since acoustics, peters out around 20,000 hertz. 25 if you can get the type of resonator proper. But it also creates harmonics, as probably most of you know. And the harmonics was how he was able to derive the frequencies. He would play various chords, which is a combination, of course, of different frequencies. And these different chords would have harmonics that would amplify up at a certain frequency. Like if you had C and C2, playing those together would get you some harmonics up out of the audio spectrum, into the ultrasonic spectrum. And so that's how he was able to generate these higher frequencies, and that's how he derived a lot of the frequencies that he was using. Keely, as far as consciousness, used his mind coupled with instrumentation to control and manipulate the ether. This is obvious if you think about the story I just told you about the big sphere. He concentrated and control the ether going into these big sphere. And he built a levitation amplifier with the brain interface. That was, I think, what this thing was. It is on his belt. And he accidentally converted water, as I mentioned, to etheric force, and did a number of years breaking it down, figuring out what he had done. Here's a picture of the big old sphere sitting down in the ground that the Scientific American guys is taking pictures of. As far as ether history, there's a lot of interesting things. Annie Besant and Ledbetter were theosophists, And they published their findings. They did about 40 years of research on atomic structure. They were interested in what's in the inside, what's atomic structure look like. And their basic project was to verify some of the Hindu scriptures, who had a lot of knowledge of the ether, by using clairvoyance. Now, there's clairvoyance and there's psychics. Most of the people that claim they have all these abilities are just psychics, and they see just a little bit upon the physical realm into the, probably what I call the infrared, perhaps. And most of them are not very advanced. But I've done a lot of studies and was able to test and find a few good clairvoyants. Now, clairvoyant is a person that can see on all the levels very well. They can see the higher self of a person. They can see various patterns in and around people. They can see what their chakras look like, and they can go through and concentrate on different patterns in the chakras and find out what a person's various hang-ups are, as well as all these good points. And a good clairvoyant can also see at a distance and also down into the microscopic realm, and that's what Besant and Leadbetter used, with some real good clairvoyance when they studied the structure of materials. And basically, the Hindu scriptures and theosophy believes the building blocks of matter is the Anu. Now, when Leadbetter and Besant studied this stuff, they found out that they discovered that there was the three of these Anus in the next level, and the next level, of course, turned out to be the electron and the proton. And what they had discovered was that there's three particles in the proton and electron, which they had named triplets or triads. Now, if you go back to Keely, he used to talk about the triple structure of matter. And he used a lot of harmonics that were related through the triple, like 3, 9, 27, and stuff like that. So seems to be a certain amount of correlation. Here's a picture that they drew, that Besant and Leadbetter drew, of the triads. And this was, of course, verified 70 years later, by somewhat modern physics back then. Here's a picture of Besant and Leadbetter. The Anu is I believe, a toroid of etheric energy twisted many times into a particle. Now, Aether, some more historical research, we've gone back, and Dayton Miller did a bunch of research with the light beam interferometry of the Eastern University. And Miller had originally worked with Morley to refine the Michelson-Morley experiment. The Michelson-Morley experiment was actually poorly designed and didn't really prove much of anything, other than the fact that there was some ether, despite the fact that it wasn't what they had expected. They fixed it at stationary ether. And Miller perfected the interferometry, and he showed definite ether drift, and the ether drift got bigger as he went further away from the Earth. He also proved that the Earth is moving through some type of a medium, ether, obviously, at a speed of Dorado, which is a southern constellation with specific celestial direction. This kind of showed the direction that our galaxy, that our star system is moving. And the Earth, of course, is part of that. This is a picture of the Dayton Miller light beam interferometer. If you look at this puppy, this thing must have been huge. I'm not sure what the size was. It was a Case Western where Miller worked. And if you look down here at this bottom, it looks like it's on a rotating pedestal of some kind. And I think these numbers are probably an indication of, the angle. And I don't know if it turned when it was doing an interferometry measurement or whether they just turned it in various directions, and this is how they ended up showing where the galaxy was moving at the time. Probably over a period of years. And the Aether theory is, of course, not dead. Everybody in the MPA pretty well believes themselves. They might call it different things, but it's basically the same, the energy that exists throughout space. There's a cosmologist at Case Western, which is where Dayton Miller worked, and he believes that dark matter doesn't exist and that the ether can account for this big dichotomy that leads scientists to think there's dark matter. And the Galactics, they come up with this because the galaxies behave as this is much more mass and is visible to astronomers. You're all familiar with that. Physicists and guys that are into this. Now, the ether does have, in its primal state, is unstructured. There's no structure to the ether. However, due to the radiation that radiates out from the center of the galaxy, it structures this ether. And there's harmonics and different things. These are advanced beings that basically control the evolution of life throughout the galaxy, and every galaxy has this sort of structure. And those with the inner spiritual sight can see a cubic matrix of the ether. And it looks something like this. I've seen it myself on a couple of times. You wake up in that twilight zone, and sometimes you see different things, interface between being out of the body and come back and in the body. And it looks like this. There's this three-dimensional matrix of points of light, and like each of these intersections of this cube form a cubic matrix. And I've seen this. My wife's seen it, and I know a few other people that have seen it. Some of the good clairvoyants can see it much better. Now, there's various measurable fields from the ether. Now, when you operate and do something to the ether, it creates other fields and fields we can measure. So I got to get a little drink here.
Hey, Dan, just a heads up. I don't know why this is happening, but occasionally your audio kind of drifts out. Is it possibly because you're pulling the mic away from your mouth? I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
I'm probably not focusing on the phone. I'm just watching my here and turning my head around. I'll try and
oh, maybe when you turn your head, we're losing you. Because once in a while, we're losing your sound, and then we lose half a sentence or something, and then you come back. So just to let you know.
Okay, thanks. Magnetism is the curl of the ether in a mathematical curl. And if you provide some torque and put a little vortex in the ether, you end up getting a magnetic field. And I proved this stuff in the lab a number of years ago. And what happens is you get when you can do this without any kind of metal or anything. You can do it with non-metal materials. And I had several other people verify it with flux gate magnetometers and stuff like that. But what happens is that this torque creates the ether, and it it's like a vortex in ether. And of course, if you think about the electron itself, the electron is a rotating ring. The ring is a rotating ring of ether, and it rotates in two directions. I'll get into that in a second. But the electron spin drags the ether with it, and that creates the magnetic field we see around the electron. And the electric field, because the ring spinning is a higher concentration of the ether, you have a gradient between the ring and the local ether. So what you got is an electric field, and that's measurable. Now, the gravity field itself is a secondary effect, and maybe a tertiary effect, due to particle interaction with the ether. And I'll get that in a minute here. Let's go on to the next thing. This is kind of a little summary of some different ancient and modern stuff that's going on as far as the ether being in theoretical particle theory. Of course, Sant and Ledbetter came up with a twisted toroidal ring, and physicist Barry Miggs from University of California and Paul Stowe, who is a physicist, works at some of the nuclear labs in California, came up with this electron and proton or toroid rings, and they also derived some math about the gravity, which turned out to be incorrect as far as I can tell. And then there was Berkman and Lucas, came up with the same kind of thing out of some different look, just a little different look at the whole picture. And this is a picture of hydrogen and helium and the toroidal rings. Now, that accounts for the two stable particles we have in the universe. The next stable, of course, is the neutron, but it only lasts about 15 seconds, and it devolves into a proton and electron. So it's again a composite particle. Of course, we know from the studies they've done with the big colliders and things, and also some of the smaller atomic devices, that they've discovered the other subatomic particles, and that's the particle soup we have in the standard model these days. Now, I thought in the past that gravity was a gradient of the electric field, and I just finally came to the conclusion after I'd done a lot of experiments that this is not the case. And I went back to my old Keely stuff and came up with a better picture, but I'll tell you in a minute. So really, a lot of this stuff with the Biot-Brown effect is not an anti-gravity effect. What it is, an electrostatic effect. And all these guys that are screwing around with lifters and stuff are wasting their time, because it's really an electrostatic lifting effect based on ionic particles being ejected out around these little lifters. It's obvious gravity fields exist. I mean, you have to be pretty dense not to believe that. You jump up and down, you end up on the Earth every time. So the next question is, where does it come from? Seems to be intrinsic to mass, and that's why we've got all these wild theories everybody comes up with. Ether and gravity. We got the two fundamental particles, the electron and the proton. Ether flows and is pumped through the electron. That's one way to look at it. A small amount of the ether flowing into this particle is resisted or used by the ring. Now, I've never figured out for sure whether it's a support for the ring or just gets resisted as the ether gets pumped through it. And either way, you can still model this thing as a hydrodynamic fluid being pumped through the ring. And some of you guys that are real math whizzes figure this out and come up with a real field theory for the gravity. I never did take hydrodynamics, and then I never got into it. I didn't like mechanical stuff too good when I was in college. I listened to my advisors a little more. But really, what happens is if the ether is flowing in and you got a little less flowing out, you end up with a force, Fg, which is the gravity field. And of course, the other way is to look at it as a resistance as it gets sucked through this smaller ring from this big field of ether out there, and you get a resistance. When that to me is also the same deal. Now, if you look at this pictorial, and I don't know if this is really the way it works, but I made a simplified vortex ring, and this is ether flowing in. This pink is the hot stuff, and it's a little higher intensity being pulled in, and then it comes through a neutral center, and and then it gets ejected back out the outside. Now the ring rotates in several dimensions. It rotates, around in a circle around the ring itself, and it has a twist to it. And this twist is what sucks the ether down through it. Now, the ether is a basic particle. Now, there are various patterns that flow out of the center of the galaxy from these great beings, and these patterns define the structure of the universe. They define everything from subatomic matter on up through the structure of the galaxies and on up the line. And as a spiritual being evolves, he becomes more and more capable of manifesting things on various levels. But this is the basic structure. It's got this vortex ring and the two particles, the electron and proton, create the gravity field, they create the electric field, and they end up creating also the electric, gravity, and magnetic field. Getting a little tongue-tied here. In a large ether flow direction, the Earth, we all know if a particle has a given mass, which is inertia or gravity field, whatever you want to call it, it organizes all the ether flow so it flows to a neutral center. Now, Keely talked a lot about neutral centers. I mean, to him, if you could control the energy in and out of a neutral center, you can control the total particle. And, of course, they're flowing in toward a neutral center will create a spherical shape, and that's why we end up with roughly oblate spheroids due to the spinning of the Earth and the ether gravity forces controlling the mass. Now, to create anti-gravity, or opposite of gravity, amounts to changing the direction of the ether flow. Now, because the Earth has this big, huge ether flow flowing into it, the natural direction for the ether, for the Earth, is from out in. You know, it's this force that pushes all the mass down toward the neutral center. And this is consonant with Keely. Boy, that was a good one. Wonder what that was doing. So, in other words, let me go back here. In other words, if you increase this flow from here to this direction, or you can increase the natural energy or force going this way, this ring's going to move in the other direction. Otherwise, it's going to move in this direction down toward the neutral center of the Earth, and all the particles of mass that have electrons, protons, and stuff are going to all get pulled down toward the Earth. Now, if you're interested in doing generating a little ether, there's an easy way to do it. A few years back, a friend of mine was giving me crystals, a guy named Joe Blankenship. Joe's was real nut for rocks and crystals and all this stuff. He had a huge collection of things. And every time I'd go up to Tucson and visit him, he'd give me some crystals. And he only gave me crystals. He used to give everybody else all kind of rocks, but he always gave me crystals. So we were riding back home, and I was sitting over on the passenger side, and I was looking at these crystals, and I thought, what the heck am I supposed to do with these things? And I didn't really think much about it, but the next morning, as I was waking up, this picture was flashed in my head, and it was absolutely down to the gnat's eyebrow. And here was a crystal up front. It had a coil around it. Those slash lines are coil. Yeah, it had a little microcontroller driver, and I had a bunch of these sitting around the lab doing various things. And a DC power supply. Now, this can be either a battery inside, or you can have it outside, pumping a little DC in here. And this thing, what it does is it creates, here's a non-conductor with a magnetic field created by this pulsing microcontroller, and it shoots out an ether beam. And people with their inner sight open, their clairvoyant sight, can actually see these beams coming off of these devices. And I didn't think much of it. I thought, this is just another thing, to screw around with. I've got so much stuff going in the lab, I don't know which end is up sometimes. And my wife is having a little knee problem. She says, my knee's been bothering me. She says, why don't you go build this thing and see if it'll help my knees? So I put one together, had all the parts, so it was no big deal. And took it in. My wife turned it on and pointed at her knee, which was paining her. And within 5 minutes, all the pain went away. And she did this for a couple of days in a row, and the pain never came back to her knees. So I thought, well, that's pretty neat. So I told Joe about it, and Joe told some of the people in Tucson about that, a morning breakfast club, and so I went up there and talked to them, and one of the ladies in the best club wanted to have one of these things. So I built her one, and she had a neighbor whose husband had just gotten out of back surgery. I mean, well, like a month or two before, and he had continuous pain for over 2 months. He couldn't hardly walk or do anything. So this lady that had bought one of these little healing devices loaned it to her neighbor friend, and her neighbor friend treated her back every day for 2 weeks, and this guy's back pain went away. Of course, it's anecdotal, but anyway, that's what the story is. So it's an interesting device. The ether in its primal state has all these good patterns of perfection in it. So if you can create a pure ether beam, you got yourself a good healing device. Now this has taken this device here. If you look at it, I'll get my pointer going here. I don't know why it disappears. I've got this thing to the point where all of this has been replaced by a pattern, an etheric, a physical pattern that tunes into the center of the galaxy. And it pumps this crystal and pumps out a continuous beam. And I also improve the crystal to the point, I tune the crystals and some other stuff. It's kind of an interesting little device. Fits in a lady's purse about 3.5 inches long. And it's possible you could hop one of these things up and use it for some ether experiments. I haven't done that because I'm doing some other things right now. But that's basically, if you're interested in possibly experimenting around with some of this. Back to the galaxy, there's great beings in here that radiate out patterns of all of the atomic structure. They also radiate all the patterns of perfection, like love and peace and harmony and power and all kinds of stuff that are all divine energies. And this is what gets radiated through the universe. And then we're down here kind of toward the bottom of the food chain, down here trying to learn to control stuff on this level, and there's beings in between that evolve up the ladder. One of the things that's in this energy that radiates out through the universe is what I call the sacred fire. And the sacred fire has all this constructive energy in it to be used for healing and things. The sacred fire has some interesting properties. One of the reasons that disease exists is we've screwed up the body. We've got impurities either on the physical, on the mental, and emotional, etheric levels. And what this does is it sets up patterns in the ether as well as on the physical body that are distortions. And these distortions is what causes diseases, and they cause actually manifest germs. Germs get created out of this garbage that all the hate and things that get people people radiate out to the rest of life around them. And the sacred fire will clean this stuff up. The sacred fire acts like you took a crumpled up piece of paper with a bunch of lousy patterns in it, and you blaze the sacred fire through it, and the whole thing comes out with a clean sheet of paper. Well, what happens with these negative patterns that a person has drawn around themselves is they blaze a sacred fire through it, and it straightens out these patterns. Now, depending on the intensity of the sacred fire they use, they can either get an intense miraculous type healing, or maybe it takes some period of time to fix it up. Now, there's various levels of the ether. We got the sacred fire, of course, is the highest level of the ether. And the next level down is the cosmic light substance, which you can actually see. Most people can see these little particles of ether dancing around in the sunlight. And we're here at over almost a mile high where I live, and you can go stand out there, or sit in a chair and look at the stuff going on in the atmosphere, and you can see all these little bright fireflies type things floating around in the atmosphere. The next level down is the chi, or the prana. On that, the chi, of course, all of you have heard about, or pranic energy. This is controlled by breathing, and you breathe in this pranic light substance. The qi is a term used in more of the Chinese and the Oriental type philosophies, both for martial arts and for healing, and is quite well known if you get into that. Then you got down to the bottom level of the ether, the scumbag level, which is the orgone energy. Now, Reich thought he had really discovered the pure quill when he'd found orgone. And it turns out that most of the orgone on the planet, due to the filth and the garbage and everything of this planet, has contaminated most of the energies down there at this low level. Not getting a clean energy. He talked about Dor, which was dangerous orgone energy. And Dor is actually, I think it's all pretty much Dor. Anybody that messes with orgone energy that I've ever studied and analyzed ends up with all kinds of problems, physical, emotional, mental problems. In fact, I know people who have died from messing around with orgone accumulators. So these are the different levels of the ether, and of course the grossest level is our atomic matter, and I've talked about that. Some of the masters we've all known that exhibited in higher consciousness and using the ether, the sacred fire. We of course have got Master Jesus, Saint Germain. We got Babaji. I don't know if he's ascended. I suspect he is, as advanced he is. And of course Yogananda is well known from the Yogananda Self-Realization Fellowship. I have friends that are in some of that. So these are some of the advanced beings and directions that people want to go if they want to get higher level. These logos patterns, the logos is well known from historical stuff. They talked about it in ancient Greece and in places. And there was various theories, but the base theory of the Logos was that it was the God energy of the universe that flows out and through which all manifestations happen. And I call the Logos the master power flame. And to me, that's the sacred fire energies. And these powers that these masters exhibit, like instantaneous healing and creating matter directly from the ether, like precipitation and dissolving matter. Keely called it dissociation, I call it etherealization. And of course, healing on a personal level. I've had several healing experiences with a couple of masters. And these powers that the masters exhibit, when they have cleaned up themselves enough, they move up into different higher levels. And when they've maintained enough constructive use of our energies, they get more and more ability with these higher forces. They are finally starting to get into some of this stuff. It was actually proven back, I think, in the 50s. This guy did some, he was I think a pastor of a church, and he was interested in the power of thought on plants, and so he gotten this out of the Bible. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible, but there are things like this if you know where to look. And what he did was he took 3 sets of seed. He got some seeds that were all from the same packets, and he mixed them all up, and he blessed one of this. He divided into 3 groups. Blessed one group. He didn't do anything to the next group, and he cursed the next group. And when he cursed it, he told them that it wouldn't grow or do anything. And then he put them in plants and planted them in pots and watered them every day. And he didn't know which was which. He had hidden which was the blessed and the non-blessed and the cursed. And he ended up with different results from these 3 pots. And one pot had these beautiful flowers growing out of it. The next pot had a few flowers, but it wasn't anything spectacular or anywhere near the other one. And the third pot had a few stragglers that had come up out of the ground and croaked. And so he checked which ones they were, and of course it was the ones that grew really well were the blessed plants, and the ones that didn't do quite as well were the ones that just stuck in the soil. And the cursed ones were the ones that hardly grew anything at all. Now, there was a guy in Japan named Emoto, who's been doing a lot of stuff with water and taking microphotographs of water. And I got a picture here on this one view graph, number 30. This is the result of, let me get this pointer here again. This is the result of heavy metal music. You can see it's really gotten kind of screwed up. This is Fujiwara water before. This is Fuji water after it's been blessed, and then this is a picture of one that somebody blessed with love, whether he did it or somebody, I don't know. He probably had some things. And this shows the power of thought on the water. Now, if you take this to heart, you got a lot of water in your body. Your body's about 80% water, liquid of some kind. And as long as you maintain good feelings of love and peace and harmony and goodwill to all men, you're going to radiate good energies into all of that water, and it's going to manifest. Now, if you're into some crappy music or some junk or whatever, you're going to end up with your water in your body looking like this. Well, I kind of like this one here. That looks like a good thing for me. So, this is the end of my talk. Solid space, the ether, a basic understanding of matter, manipulation of the ether results in the different fields. Gravity is the E field, and the curl of the field is a magnetic field, and of course gravity is another tertiary effect or secondary effect of gravity or ether getting pumped through the atomic particles. Now, various researchers have found a way to control the ether over the years. I mentioned Keely and a few others. The ether is controlled by the mind and emotional control. There was a interesting story that happened to me. I was living in Santa Barbara at the time, and this one mine, he knew I was interested in metaphysics and different things, and he said he had been told there was a chiropractor coming into town that had the ability to fire up the kundalini, which is the energy at the base of spine, and radiate through his body. And then people could put their hands over this guy's body and feel this energy. Well, I was a little skeptical because I hadn't seen any demonstration like this, but I did know that the kundalini existed. So Walt and I went to this meeting, and this guy got up. He's a chiropractor from L.A. area, and he gave a little talk on how he'd gotten to this state. I guess something had happened to him or whatever. I don't remember the exact details. But at the end, he gave this demonstration. He says, now I'm going to lay on this table. He had this little portable table he'd put up in front of the group. And then table, and he says, now I'll tell you when I'm in this state. He says, you can come up and you can put your hands over him and feel this energy radiating off of him. So I figured, well, if this guy's for real, I'll be able to control it because this is part of the etheric field radiating through him. So he was up there, he laid down on this table and concentrated for a few minutes. And he says, okay, I'm ready. So everybody got around him, and you could put your hands, you didn't touch the guy, you just put her so above the guy's laying there. And you could feel this radiating force coming out of this guy, and I could feel it creeping up my arms. So I did a little experiment since I was studying yoga and thinking you could control this stuff. So I ran this energy through my whole body, and then I pushed it back out through my hands, because I didn't want any of this guy's energy to be, I don't know how pure he was or like that. But it was rather interesting that you can control this thing mentally and emotionally. Keely did it, and of course a lot of other people that are into metaphysics can do it. People that are into martial arts do it a lot. There's even videos on the internet showing these martial arts guys using chi energy to repel people that were trying to attack them. And when you get to the adept level, which is an undescended master. He can control a lot of the stuff at this level. Anyway, thanks for listening, and God bless you. If you've got any questions, be glad to answer a few if you got some.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dan. I have to say this was a little atypical for an NPA presentation. Maybe maybe a little heavy on the metaphysics and religious aspects, and I guess. But you know, we're a pretty open group. I'd like to maybe encourage the questions to be directed more toward the science and the physics and less toward that, if that's, although I don't want to close doors. But anyway, just for whatever that's worth. Well, the way we do it at this point is if anybody has a question or comment, we ask you to raise a flag. Michael Antesky's first in line. And then you can unmute yourself. I muted everybody. There's a few new people here, so I muted you so that we would avoid feedback because we sometimes get into that. But if you want to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then you know when it's your turn, then go ahead and say what you want to say. So Michael, you're first, and if you want to, we sure can. If you want to bring your video on when you're speaking, that'd be even better. But you don't have to.
Well, you mentioned the Theosophists, and they believe that we live in a highly quantized world. They say it doesn't get any denser than the world that we're in, and that the ether, you know, you'd really have to get pretty drastic to really get to the ET level of using the ether. Well, to me, one way you could show an ether would be to generate an etheric force field, such as the ET type. If you could generate an etheric force field, you could show a decrease in density of objects within the system, and that could, you know, wouldn't prove an ether, but it would show a presence of a unique type of energy which is capable of decreasing density of solid matter. And I have a kind of a secret design for something to do that, but I haven't been able to get anybody to put up the money to do it.
Oh dear, got some feedback there. Somebody must have just joined us. Can't figure out who that is. Huh. Hang on, must be a phone line. I'm gonna just mute the phone lines here.
Well, anyway, I'm looking for somebody to sponsor that test, get the financial backing to do it, because I think it could be done.
Okay. And could you explain that one more time? I guess this experiment you want to do?
Well, I can't go into the details of it over the internet. I mean, it'd be kind of like secret stuff, because as Mr. Davidson was saying, it's kind of it's a unique type of energy with properties that would be, you couldn't just roll it out to everybody in sight, you know? I mean, it's something that you have to kind of go at gingerly, at least at first.
Okay.
If you could find that, if you could generate an etheric force field like that, you'd be in business starting out anyway.
Ah, Dr. Lucas, it's you. I didn't think it would be, but it's you. Sorry, Michael. As you were talking, I was trying to figure out where the feedback was coming from.
Can you hear me? Answer this man's?
Yes, of course. Yes, please.
Michael, I guess it's your name. I'm in the same position that you are, but I have a lot of experience over the years, and when I found out that this is a do-it-yourself universe, that's kind of a silly way to put it, maybe, but I started out back in the 50s, and I figure I had to prove a lot of this stuff myself, and I thought I needed funding to do a lot of this research, because I had a lot of what I thought were fantastic ideas, and now I look back on them and they were pretty trivial and probably wouldn't have proved anything. But when I started experimenting with this stuff in earnest, I was able to do things myself. And now and then somebody'd come along and maybe provide me so little money they'd buy one of the, like the healing wand or something like that. That was been a few years ago. But the thing I found was that you need to come up with some way of showing some demonstration that you have something. Now, I've looked at it, lots of people's stuff where they thought they had a free energy device or they had an anti-gravity device or whatever, and it turned out that they were mismeasured.
My procedure would not use any devices. It would use natural systems, setting up a series of natural elements according to a certain designed to generate an etheric field. It's nothing similar to those previous.
Mike, well, what I suggest you do is you work yourself up to a demonstration. If this doesn't take a lot to work on, that you find some way to build a small demo of this thing. And if you can demonstrate something, then you can get some funding. But most of the guys that I know that are willing to fund this stuff, and a lot of them I know guys that got many millions of dollars are willing to stick in this stuff, you can come up with something that's really demonstrable. They will pave your driveway in gold bricks, so to speak.
No, there's no way to do it on a small scale. You have to do full tilt almost. In fact, the biggest problem would be overdoing it, and you'd be dealing with kind of dangerous energies. I mean, with unique dangers involved. You have to really know what you're doing, but you couldn't do it on a small scale in a laboratory or something like that.
Well,
There's no cheap way of doing it.
There's probably some way to do this on a small scale, and if you can't do it on a small scale, it's a waste of time. Nobody's going to come to your door and offer you any money or do something just because you got a good idea, or you think you got a good idea, or maybe you have a really fantastic idea.
Well, it's not my idea, and I have other areas that could buttress the credibility of the general source of information that is the basis of the procedure. In other words, it's not just a one-dimensional thing. If you're into this ET thing, you have a lot of other areas that could kind of almost prove it to somebody if somebody wanted to look into it.
Yeah, let me tell you a little story. After I analyzed the pyramid, and all you need for getting any pyramid energy is the outline of the pyramid itself. In other words, all the edges going up to that apex and base. And I figured, well, if that's all you need, then somewhere there's some way of interfacing the ether by having two intersecting lines. And if you go to my shape power book, it explains that whole thing. So I got to the point where Keely did. Keely could write symbols on the wall, on the blackboard, and make his stuff work. And I can draw a symbol on a blackboard, and I can measure a magnetic field around it. And so, and this is non-magnetic material. This is has no metal or anything in it. It's strictly chalk and a blackboard or whatever. You can draw it on a piece of paper if you like. And this can be done very simply. You can measure with a fluxgate magnetometer if you know what you're doing. So I'm ready to go to the next question. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Lucas, you're next. I'm just letting you know that we got some terrible feedback from you earlier, but go ahead and let's unmute and see how it goes.
I noticed from the slide that's on the screen, there's a close correlation between ether and E fields, magnetic fields, and gravity. And in my work, I do everything in terms of the fields. How do you know that there's something beyond the field that's an ether instead of just the fields itself?
Okay, that's a real good question. And
by the way, Dan, just before you answer, I just want to let you know you'd mentioned Dr. Lucas in your presentation in Common Sense.
I read all your stuff, Dr. Lucas.
Okay, just wanted to know who this was. Okay.
I really know, I've gone through your stuff, Dr. Lucas, and you've done an excellent job. I just love your derivation of the vortex rings and all that stuff. I'm not quite sure how to do what you explain, other than I suggest you go take a course in Tai Chi or Kung Fu. You do learn to control these energies and find out that there's something there besides fields. There is an energy that you can control mentally. You can project it. You can feel it, like that thing with that chiropractor, Dr. Morissetti, I think was his name. You can feel this energy. There's, of course, there wasn't any instrumentation there to measure whether there's a field or not, but there was certain this energy flowing around. I'm not sure how to do what you suggest. I think a lot of it is something personal, part of the belief that you have that may keep this stuff from happening in your world. You just have to. I don't know how to tell you any other way. The little experiment with the healing wand is a good example. If you take a flux gate magnetometer, you can, of course, measure a magnetic field around that coil that's around the crystal. Now, the crystal being a non-metallic object, you would think that it isn't going to do anything. I mean, like if you put a metal thing in there, it's going to act as a magnetic. Whereas with something like a crystal, which is non-magnetic, strictly a quartz, very simple atomic structure, and you can feel this field 3 or 4 feet away. Now, I can take one of these devices and I can point it at the various energy centers of the body. There happens to be 7 ganglionic centers along the spine, and the top of the head, of course, is the main energy point. In yoga, it's called the crown chakra. And I can take one of these healing wands, and I can point it down into the chakra, and I can feel a radiating energy flowing out around the body for about 6 feet in every direction. Now, I defy you to take a flux gate magnetometer or anything else that's even more sensitive and measure a magnetic field around that person or electric field, because there's no electric field. If you can take that wand and take your flux gate, you can measure the magnetic field out there for maybe 5 or 6 inches. But you go out there at 3 feet and you won't measure anything, and yet if you're sensitive, you can feel the energy. That's why I say maybe you need to change your diet and to get rid of some of your blockages or whatever. But there's millions of people out there that can feel these energies, and there's a few that can see them. And this is I'm sorry to tell you, but it's beyond the normal belief system of most of the people that have been on this planet for the last 2,000 years. Next question.
Okay. I guess, Pal, you're next. And before you maybe go on to Pal, I just wanted to, I think Dr. Lucas's question was not so much the qualitative difference, but the quantitative difference. In other words, how do you what we measure, we have certain quantities that we measure: voltage, energy, mass. And you're saying this is energy, but it's not energy that's measured in terms of quantities that we know. So is there another quantity? In other words, I think it's more not an experiential question as just so much as a mathematical question. Is there a unit for this? Do you follow where I'm coming from?
Okay, I see what you're saying, and I get your question, Dr. Lucas. Quantitatively, the problem is that your nervous system in a highly tuned state is much more sensitive than anything we've got as far as physical instrumentation goes. And the existence of bioenergy, which is another name for the ether, is well accepted within even the medical profession these days. The alternative science, especially, and alternative medicine, understands that there is some kind of a biological energy that we do not know what it is. It does not fit into the normal quantitative capability to measure this stuff. So that's about all I can say. I don't know how to say it in any other way. Your nervous system is an extremely sensitive detector. If you've ever walked into a room, you can tell a lot of times the atmosphere of the room kind of tells you what's going on in the room. And people walk into the room and say, oh man, this is a real downer. I mean, if you've ever gone into a bar or someplace, I mean, there's some really low-level stuff in those places. You go into a church, you can feel all these nice healing energies and everything else. And there's a quantitative difference as far as your feelings go. And somewhere along the line, a person has to come to the point where he's able to sense these energies. Keely could sense them. He got to the point where he could control them. So, I just don't know what to say on the subject about quantitative things. I'd like to develop an instrument someday that would detect some of this stuff. It has to be more, it might have to be biological. You might have to have a biological type of sensor. And, of course, plants and things, there's been a lot of studies with plants with the Baxter phenomenon and stuff like that. And to me, that proves that there is some other energy. And I can feel this energy. I can occasionally sense the extent of it or the size of it or feeling of it. But I don't know of any physical, other than if you build something biological.
Right. Well, I was going to say, there are essentially, I mean, we could probably debate this, but there are basically 4 different types of energies for which we have which we can quantify. They would be the potential energy, which is QV, and thermal energy, which is KT, and then rotational energy, which would be H nu, or H times frequency, and then we also have, translational energy, which is mv squared or mc squared. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that this would be a 5th kind of energy and probably would have a 5th kind of quantity. Is that fair enough?
That's fair enough. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Okay. All right, pal, I took some of your time. You can go ahead now.
Any other questions?
Yeah, pal's gonna get, do you need me to unmute your phone? Okay, pal, hang on. You're 203. You're 203, right, pal? I'm gonna unmute you. Just a second. Okay, pal, I unmuted the 203 number. Is that you?
No, I'm
Okay.
not on the phone, am I?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
What do you mean? I'm not even on the phone. I put
Oh, okay. Well, I hear you, so it doesn't matter. Go ahead.
I put it on hold when you muted the phone. So, but while you were trying, you should have been able to hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, then can you mute the phone again? No. Oh no, I put it on.
But it's through the phone that we hear you. I just muted it and then I didn't hear you. So it's the phone line that we hear, not the other.
No, you don't. I put the phone on hold. You're hearing me through the...
Well, all right. There's no need to argue. We can hear you, so go ahead.
No, but I'm just saying, the phone line is just not connected.
Well, I tried muting the phone line and then I couldn't hear you, so that's all I know. But go ahead.
I can't hear either. I can hear sounds, but I can't tell what you're saying.
Hold on your...
You can't hear, pal?
I can hear sound, but I can't tell what she's saying.
Interesting.
Oh, let me see. Maybe
I hear him just
you don't
fine.
need to use both.
No, you don't.
Okay, I mean, this is the phone line now. But then I have to take the other one off and mute it. Otherwise it interferes.
I did.
You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay, so I'm going to mute myself on the...
I already did. You're good. Just go ahead.
You did, right. Yeah, I see it. Okay, my question, actually I have kind of two quick questions. One is, actually, Glenn was before me. I hope I'm not taking out of
I'm
turn
sorry, Glenn.
time.
I apologize. Glenn, did you? Well, we went to all
Yeah,
this trouble to get you ready to go. So, Glenn,
yeah.
Glenn
I
can
think you
wait.
should have
He'll
him
be
first
ready.
because it's not polite to jump around.
Well, it's not, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. I thought you were next. Glenn, do you want to say something? Or
Go.
I've got him. I got his phone line muted too. Hang on. All right, I mute all the phone lines because I don't know where I get here
Which, who is
device.
who?
I have to mute everybody. So, Glenn, you're unmuted on the phone line if you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm on the phone. Dan, I think I heard you say something about anti-gravity, or several things about it. Is there an anti-gravity device in the world right now that works?
Yes.
Where is it?
That I can't discuss.
Okay, I understand. I understand completely. All right. Be it known that there is such a thing as an anti-gravity device that's currently working in the world, and it cannot be discussed. Okay, thank you very much. I enjoyed your talk, and as far as these other forces are concerned, I guess this is not really relevant, but birds seem to be able to navigate from place to place, and they seem to be able to detect magnetism with their biological bodies. Does that have anything to do with anything that you've been discussing?
Not sure who you're talking about or what they do, but some people
birds. We have birds that visit here, and they come back to the exact same nest, and God knows how far they come. It appears as though birds are able to navigate very, very well, and my idea is that they're following, they're using magnetism, and that they can sense, their brains can sense magnetism.
Yeah, okay, I think I can answer that. They've done some studies of a lot of this bird migration stuff, from the southern hemisphere to the northern and back down there again. And a lot of these animals, like the eagles and the pigeons and stuff, we get a lot of vultures around here because they're picking up roadkill. And they've analyzed the brain structure of a lot of these, and they do have a small amount of magnetite in their brain. And this may act as kind of a magnetic compass. Of course, the magnetism does interface with the ether, which I've proven here in the lab. And they may have another sense above that detects these ether, because the ether is unique for every location. And I can put an energy field around any point in space and time. Well, I don't know about time, but it's anywhere in space around any defined object. And I've proven this in the lab. I've built devices that will put a field around that I can measure with with an electrostatic voltmeter. I can create an electric field in another part of the house, and there's nothing in between. Now, on the ether level, if you look at the physics even of the quantum electrodynamics and stuff, the passage of fields doesn't exist on that level. What happens is if you create a pattern in the ether, it will manifest as whatever you've commanded that pattern to be, whether you create it as an electric field or something else. And so it is possible for these birds to maybe have a unique sensibility of location based on this kind of phenomena.
So this would not. What you're saying is it's probably not as simple as just a magnetic detection sense. Is this similar to the thing going up your arm when you can feel this force, would it be similar or totally different from what the birds are experiencing when they navigate?
I suspect it's similar. You know, birds are fairly sensitive to energies. I've seen them do stuff out here, and they are weird things and stuff. And I think it's probably a combination of the magnetic bursts and also combined with these other, and the fact that they go to the same place. We had a nest of swallows nesting on our porch, and we thought, oh, that's real cute, all these nice swallows, and they had a little family. Ever since, we have chased these things off because they crap all over the porch and really make a mess. And it's not just one swallow family. It's a bunch of males fighting, and they end up fighting on the porch, and one of them kills the other, and all kinds of weird, nasty stuff. So we just quit letting them, have a nest on the porch. But I don't know if it's the same family, but the same bunch of swallows, I think were probably the same, would come back at every time during the same time of year to this location and try and start building a mud nest in our rafters out there on the porch. So I suspect that since they seem to be location capable, that they're having a combination of what goes on the quantum etheric level and also on the magnetic, because they do interface. So that's kind of what I think. I think this energy I could feel above this guy was probably some biological energy that was radiating off of it, and I could control it mentally. So I think it's
there might be more than one. Greg talked about the four. There
could be a combination of energies that all intersect and make unique definition of location.
Yeah. Well, I say fascinating. I wouldn't rule out anything at this point. I think it's great.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, I did a lot of studies back in the 60s and 70s. It was a fascinating phenomenon. I think they've taken and tagged these birds, especially these bigger birds, and they found that that same bird would come back to the same exact location in both South America and up here somewhere in North America. And it roughly the same, depending on weather conditions and whatever. So you're right, it is a very interesting phenomenon.
And very real.
They've measured it. They don't measure any fields. They do this thing between the two locations.
Okay. Pal, did you want to give us your questions now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Now, again, this is not phone. I'm holding the phone in front of me. It's not touching to my ears or mouth. Okay?
I know it, but we're hearing you on the phone.
Can't hear me? You hear me on the phone?
No, it's terrible.
But it's okay. We hear you, so it doesn't matter. So just go ahead.
That's not even my number. How can you hear me on the phone by looking at somebody else's number?
Yours is the 203-924-2055, yes?
Yes.
That's what we're hearing.
Yeah, that's because I'm holding it so close to my voice.
Okay.
Put it away. Or I should put it on hold. Let me put it on hold.
Okay. All right.
Just to complete the test,
Okay, let's do it. Now we can't hear you at all. We don't hear a thing. So whatever you unplugged, plug it back in so we can hear you. And seriously, pal, we need to move forward with your question. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Now we hear you.
I'm back to the phone line now, okay?
Yes.
And I will mute myself on the microphone.
I already did. Go ahead. Just test.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. First of all, Dan, I want to compliment you that at least to the best of my memory and everything, and I'm a fairly regular attendee of this conference, that this is the highest attended NPA video conference I have ever attended. Absolutely, you seem to attract a lot of people, but I don't have, like Greg Volk official information on this. But I'm impressed that so many people are interested in this thing.
We have pretty good attendance today. I wouldn't say it's the highest ever, but it's up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My first little question is that the three kinds of energies that you talk about, physical, etheric, and spiritual, are they on a continuum or are they discrete? And if they are discrete, can you talk a little bit about the separation or the demarcation between the three?
Okay. I think you're asking, you're coming through a little garbled, but I think you're asking if these spiritual energies are discrete and whether they're continuous, or whether they're on and off, or that sort of thing. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm talking about the relationship between the three energies. Not just spiritual, not just physical, not just ethereal, but the relationship between the three. Is that on a continuum, or are they discrete with separation between the three that you can explain what that separation is? First of all, you answered the question, are they on a continuum or not?
Okay, the logos is continuous. It radiates out through the universe. And instrumentation that I've built that works on the causal level. See, I mentioned there's different levels within these three main levels, the causal, the etheric, and the physical. There's about 7 levels within each one. And I've been able to do some things on the lower causal level, and I can create a continuous spiritual energy field where I can turn it on and off. And there are people that I've sent energies around, and they can tell exactly when I turn them on and off. But the energies that the universe radiates are continuous. The spiritual energy radiates throughout the universe. And if you want to tune into this, you need to still down to where you can feel these energies. And when you get your nervous system tuned up, for myself, I feel an energy field coming into the top of my head that stimulates my entire body. But it's a very uplifting and peaceful and harmonious energy. But it's always there if I want to tune into it. And so to answer your question on as far as the universe goes, it's radiating out this good stuff all the time. And the only reason we don't feel it all the time is it has to do with our attention. Your attention is your focusing mechanism down here in this type of body that we have. We got 4 levels to this type of body. And your mental level, the attention is the capability, the tuning mechanism. And I've done experiments with a lot of this stuff. I mean, again, it's a personal thing. But you have to kind of play around and experiment with this thing. If you want to get more tuned up, I suggest you learn how to meditate properly. But I think I answered your question. The universe is continuous. People down here that can send these energies can control them whether they're continuous or not. I got machines that run continuously, and also have some that are discrete.
Okay. I want to do another question. What Greg mentioned as the 5th energy, maybe you mentioned it by other names, key energy and some kind of many different names for it. I want to know if you can say whether that 5th energy has a polarity or not.
Whether it has a what?
Polarity. Polarity meaning positive or negative, good and bad. Anything, any of the 2 oppositions are considered polarities, like left and right. So do these energies are they symmetrical or asymmetrical?
Greg, could you reiterate?
Yeah, I can. He's having trouble hearing you, pal. The question is, do these energies, as you understand it, have polarity? Polarity being positive and negative, left and right, up and down, male and female, or are they just one energy? That's his question.
Yeah.
Okay, it depends on. To say this fifth energy is just the fifth energy is really at the gross level. It's like saying there's a causal and an etheric and a physical level. This fifth energy is there. Keely found out there was 27 levels that he could access with his instrumentation and control, and he actually was able to dissect these energy fields to those levels. Whether they are directional or left, right, up, and down, I think that depends on what the instrumentation he was using to do this. But to answer that there's a fifth energy and it has these specific properties, I think that's too at a grosser level.
Okay.
Okay, just thank you. I'm done.
All right. And let's see, how are we doing on flags here? Looks like Guy Grantham, I think, was next, and then Yonel after that. I may have you two mixed up. So, Guy, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not putting my camera on, it takes up too much bandwidth.
No problem.
A couple of anecdotes leading to a question, really. In the 70s, I learned Japanese, and my sensei, my teacher, was a lady who we also learned about Japanese culture. And she told of a tale when a samurai, who must have been quite a late samurai in those days, came to their village when she was a child. And the children clustered around the samurai and asked him to do something. And there was a pigeon tree. So he stared at it for a while, shouted, and dead. The kids brought the pigeon back, laid it on the top of a gatepost with its wings drooping on its back, with its wings laid out, waved his hands over it, and it got up.
Okay, is that the end of translate again? I couldn't understand this.
Also, I've took.
Yeah, Guy.
No,
just
no,
to
no.
let you know, for whatever reason, your
Okay,
sound is kind of getting some electronic interference, so we're not hearing every word. It comes and goes. I'm not sure what to say to do about it, but I'm just letting you be aware of that.
Because I'm hearing that from this end of yourselves.
Okay, well, that's how you sound to us.
Another one is that I have taught very many people to douse for not water, but for whatever seems to be buried under the ground. And I believe that we're looking, even finding empty asbestos pipes, which have then been dug out to prove where they are. Could it common fifth field is in fact a gravity field, and gravity is not a secondary or tertiary minor effect of electromagnetism? That's my question.
Okay.
Did you get that? No.
Something about dowsing. But I didn't understand the question.
To be a gravity by dowsing, which I tend to think we coach people and do it. It seems to be an innate ability, and I think we detect inertia or gravitational field. In that case, is gravitational field in itself a primary field, or is it, as Dan suggests, a secondary or only tertiary effect?
That background noise was coming from Harry Ricker, so that may help to get rid of that. Okay, so let me repeat the question as I understood it, Guy, because we're not getting every word. Is dowsing, or is gravity a secondary or tertiary kind of field as a dowsing field would be? Is that your question?
Yes, okay.
Okay, so Dan, are you ready to answer that?
Yeah.
I don't know where the music's coming from. I'm gonna go through and
I've
mute
done
some
a
people.
lot of analysis of dowsing, and in fact, I've had a kind of an ongoing argument with local dowsers and stuff. And there's dowsers, and then there's real dowsers. Now, the real dowsers are few and far between. It's like psychics and clairvoyants. The clairvoyants are few and far between. Now, a really good dowser is someone that can actually sense, feel, and some of them that can even see these things that they're dowsing for. What kind of a field it is, what I think it is it's a higher ability that the dowser has, that he's able to sense something on a higher level. Now, this dowsing is what I call one of the subsets of inner guidance. Now, if you go back to the old Bible stuff as well as some of the newer metaphysical stuff, the general thing is you can hear the voice of God. Now, I consider if you can really hear the voice of God, that's probably the highest level because you're interfacing directly into the level. Now, there's lesser states of guidance. Now, down from that is probably clairvoyance, where a really good clairvoyance, as I mentioned, can see things at a distance, see things microscopically, see things globally, see energies on these different scales. And a really good dowser can douse some of this stuff. Now, most of the dowsers I've met, the thing that a dowser does is he has to have the capability to be able to get his opinions out of the dowsing effect. I've found that these guys, if they have a single opinion about what they're dowsing for, they will douse it. Now, dowsing is another aspect of kinesiology. I've seen these chiropractors and guys use this kinesiology as if it was some kind of a absolute way of telling what a patient was feeling or doing. And I don't know if you've ever gotten into kinesiology, but what it is, I consider it another form of trying to get your guidance. And most of the guys that mess around with dowsing and stuff are down toward the lower levels of inner guidance. And I'm not saying that they're doing bad stuff or that they're. It's just that their inner guidance capability comes through their dowsing. So if they get really good inner guidance, they can be a really good dowser. And I've done dowsing. I've played around with it, and I've built instruments that enhance the dowsing effect and stuff. And it is possible to enhance the energies that a dowser feels. Let me give you an example. I built this one device that would project an energy field to a specific atomic type structure like gold or silver or whatever. And I had a clairvoyant help me with the testing on this. When I fired up this instrument, the clairvoyant could see a beam of energy going from the transmitter out to the particular sample. And this, to me, is the high level of really good dowsing and inner clairvoyance. Whereas most of the dowsers that use this type of instrumentation, they walk around the transmitter and they think they feel these energies. And if they have a single opinion about where something is, like most of these dowsers, if you test them, can't find anything that they don't know where it is. To me, that's saying they have an inner, an emotional or mental bias toward where the thing is, so they're going to detect it no matter what. And the really good dowsers will not detect something that's not there. They just won't detect it. But if something is there, there is a resonance on the etheric level with other like things. For example, at the highest level, this logos energies radiate out from the center of the galaxy. And one of the patterns is the electron and the proton. Now, the reason the electron and proton have the structure that they do is because that is a pattern that's radiating out through the universe. So every proton and electron on some level is tuned to every other proton and electron. Now, if you go to grosser levels of matter, like a chunk of gold or piece of lead or whatever, those particular substances will resonate with other substances of the same sort. Now, that resonation type phenomena may not go very far. I mean, it depends on the quantity of the material and what have you. But a lot of these instrumentation guys that are selling this dowsing stuff claim they'll go many miles, and actually they don't do that. If you can see it on the air level, the clairvoyants tell me that they don't go that far. But there is a resonance between like materials, and some materials, even though they're like, don't resonate very well. However, when they're purified, they resonate really well. Like a piece of really pure gold resonates with other pure gold, and a particular type of piece of gold with a pattern on it will resonate with another piece of gold. Like if you have two gold eagles, they resonate really well together because they have all the same patterns. Everything has a pattern in the universe, and all those patterns resonate no matter where they are. And the highest level of resonation, of course, is just at the pattern level. So the reason you can create things in space somewhere else is because you can project a pattern to that space and have it manifest. Because whenever you create a pattern in the universe, it manifests whatever you set the pattern up to do. So on the dowsing level, I think I've answered your question and probably gone way beyond it. Anything else?
Okay. Guy?
That's good. Yes, that's good. Thanks. I will confirm that we are able to detect different things. So where we find something, we can look at the same place for another object under the ground at the same time and differentiate between the two, and even look for people or animals. And one young girl I taught who was partially sighted was able to find her cat by dowsing when she couldn't even see the end of the road. It does seem to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Okay, just for, again, to remind you that we didn't hear every word of what you said, and I think it may be because we have gosh, I guess close to 50 people, which is more than we normally do. Probably we normally is more like 35. It may be affecting our bandwidth, which may be the reason why we're having difficulty understanding you. Anyway, Yanel, you're next. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And then Roger Anderson is to follow. If you happen to have your camera, it'd be great if you could turn that on. If not, we can live without it. Yanel, are you there? We can see your chin. There you go. We still don't hear you. I'll unmute you in just a second. Okay. You are unmuted, so we should be able to hear you now.
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Good to see you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time. How have you been doing?
Doing okay.
Okay, just a couple of questions for Dan Davidson. Can you hear me, Dan?
I can hear you, but I can't understand you.
Okay, I'll speak a bit slower. And
I can hear you fine, so I may I can repeat the question if necessary.
The first question that I'd like to ask you is, how would you describe light traveling through vacuum, through the ether? How would you describe light?
Did you hear that, Dan?
Oh, I didn't. Could you repeat?
The question is, how would you describe light traveling through the ether? What's your description of what light is?
The light phenomena, electromagnetic waves. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. I've analyzed it myself.
Well, maybe I make it multiple choice. Is light strictly an electromagnetic thing, or is it an ether thing in your mind?
I think light is a combination of the two, but it's mostly electromagnetic.
Okay.
Let me go back and answer another aspect of that. Dr. Kozyrev in Russia was doing a bunch of studies with crystals. They had made some crystals from crystals that were in the mirror, that were grown in the space capsule environment. And so these crystals were pretty much gravity-free. And they were looking at some specific star systems out there through a big telescope. And of course, they were getting stuff that was many light years old. And so they knew this. They had been tracking this galaxy for quite a while, over many years. They knew its different basic trajectory. So they pointed the telescope at where they thought it was. They couldn't detect anything. So Kozyrev had them cut some crystals from this crystal that was growing in the Mir space station. And they they put one of these crystals in the focus of the telescope, and they were able to detect the instantaneous location of that particular constellation where it is now, and it was within a small percentage point of where they thought it would be. So they were detecting stuff on the etheric level. Now, whether that was an electromagnetic phenomena or whether it was, I think it was probably an ether beam or something that was maybe close to the causal level, that this crystal was tuned in and capable of detecting things at enormous distances much faster than the speed of light. So I think pure light waves, that is pretty much a well-known phenomenon as electromagnetic. I'm sorry, I'm blurring there. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Is there more to your question, Yonel, or is that it?
Oh, there is another one final question.
Okay.
And that's what is ether doing if there isn't any ether inside solid objects that permeates the objects, and what is your take on what happens when we move these solid objects through the ether? Is it like passing freely through, or is it captured inside and it's not moving with the object? What is your take on it? If you
Okay, I'm going to try to restate this because I don't think he hears you. So he wants to know what happens when an object moves through the ether. Does it carry the ether with it, or does it sort of clear a path through there? Is that your question?
Exactly. Is it like a steel sponge that passes through water, or is it more like carries the water with it?
Okay, so the question is it more like a sponge, the ether more like a sponge, or is it more like water that, okay.
No. A solid object. Take any solid object.
Uh-huh.
Take any solid object and move it through free space, which is filled
Right.
with ether.
Okay, so is it like a solid object passing through free space, or is it more like passing through water? Is that fair?
Is a solid object like a sponge or not?
Yeah. Okay. So is it? That's two questions. Is the ether more like space or more like water, a
Exactly.
medium? And second question is an object more like a rock or more like a sponge? That's two questions, right?
Yeah.
In as it passes through. In other words, does the ether pass through the space within the ether like a sponge? You follow the question?
Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay.
Okay. I think you're basically talking about momentum. Earth's Newton's the third law or something. And when you have an object and start it moving, it tends to move in the same direction. That's one of the basic laws of mechanics. And so if you know that and understand what's going on, the object is acting like more like a sieve than a sponge. Because what happens is the ether is flowing down through the object, so it tends to pull it toward the Earth. Whereas if you give it a different vector and say horizontal to the Earth, it will tend to move horizontally until the force of the Earth pulls it down and it clunks to the Earth and stops moving. So the ether, when an object starts moving, moves through the object generally in the direction that it's moving at. And what happens is once that happens, the ether keeps flowing through it in that direction because that's the predominant ether flow through it. And as long as there's no other force, the object will keep on going. So if you stick something out there in outer space where there's very little gravity fields, and you start an object moving, it's going to tend to move in that direction until it gets stopped somehow or it just keeps on going. So the ether's acting as it's like you could think of a physical object as having tubes running through it, and normally the tubes are oriented vertically. And so the ether flows through these tubes, and there's a little bit of resistance to the object because there's a restriction due to hydrostatic, what is it? Well, they call it resistance. Hydrostatic resistance, so it pulls the object down toward the Earth. Now, if you give the object a shove, the tubes get oriented to the direction that you've shoved this object. So the ether flows through these tubes, and as long as there's no other ether force acting through the atomic structure, it's going to keep going in that direction. So if you can eliminate the ether flow around an object, and then give the ether whatever direction you want to go, that object's going to take off in that direction based on the amount of force that you put into the ether pressure, call it pressure, so to speak, into that pressure. So the object's going to move in that direction. That's why these flying saucers that they've tracked on radar, and we used to see them over there over Dead Man Mountain in Sturgis, and they would come down. They looked like they were practically a streak of light, and then they would make a right angle turn, or even almost turn in the other direction, and take off in the other direction the same speed, just going like a bat out of hell. So what happens in these saucers is if you can control the local ether flow around the object will move in that direction, whatever you designated.
All right. Yeah. Many thanks. Thank you so much.
All right. We are at 11 o'clock. We've been at this for 2 hours, but Roger's had his mic. Roger Anderson's next, so we'll let that be the last question for the day. Roger, go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask, this exotic stuff, when Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy and all these other things like alchemy, they do mention Boscovich briefly, but they don't really go into much detail. So I want to know, why is that? And when you're looking at how Madame Blavatsky talks about Boscovich, she is talking about it in quite an obscure way, like she's saying it is Pythagorean theory, and all this sort of thing is sort of like based upon Pythagorean theory. So why isn't Boscovich talked about very much?
Before you answer that, Dan, I just point out that Rudyard Boscovich Roger wrote a book, or recently translated a book, I guess, on the work of Rudyard Boscovich, who was the predecessor to Nikola Tesla in Serbia. Is he from Serbia?
Yeah, both in the same place.
Yeah. So anyway, and I don't know. He's assuming that you're familiar with Boscovich, which you may not be. He was an 18th century scientist. So his question is why all these people working with etheric energies and prana energies and whatever you want to call it don't refer to Boscovich very much. Why does that seem to be absent?
Okay. I've never heard of the guy. Okay. So
that's why. Question answered. Go ahead.
In English and Serbian, I can probably understand it. So
in Madame Blavatsky, her secret doctrine, she does refer to Boscovich. She says Faraday, Boscovich, and all others who see in the atoms and molecules centers of force, and in the corresponding element force, an entity by itself, are far nearer the truth, perchance, than those who, denouncing them, denounce at the same time the old corpuscular Pythagorean theory. So she's tying it into Pythagorean theory. So this sort of thing of the ether and all that is ancient wisdom based upon Pythagorean theory. So why is it not talked about that much?
Okay, like I said, I've never heard of this guy, but when
Blavatsky
I read the doctrine back in the 50s, and it was still a secret after I read it. And the secret doctrine and all of the stuff, the early stuff out of Theosophy was written according to the old law. And everything was codified. You had to have the code to understand the secret doctrine. There was two types of secret doctrines published. One was the real pure quill secrets that were going on, and the other was this outer world stuff that was very coded and obscure, and if you didn't understand the codes, you couldn't get anything out of it. And I think that's about where I was at when I read that thing. So I've never heard of Boscovich or what he really said. As far as him being quoted, that may be why also, because he's not too well known. Like I say, I haven't heard of it, and I have friends that have libraries that make my library like a little piker of nothing. And so, so that's about where it's at.
So in Serbia, Croatia sort of area where Tesla comes from, he's number 2 scientist and Boscovich is number 1.
Mm-hmm.
So
Tesla is number 2 and Boscovich
Tesla is number 2.
Yeah, in his own native country.
In his native country, so
yeah, they even have coins of with his picture on it. He's a big deal in that area of the world.
So I'm finding that peculiar. If this sort of esoteric physics is starting off sort of from Tesla and sort of ideas and Keely and all that, which all ties in. Why are they sort of like not mentioning Boscovich?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, well, again, it's very just, I think a lot of it is just tradition, people just don't know. There's a certain body of knowledge that people get, and that's kind of passes around, and somehow or other that Boscovich got excluded from that, which is really a shame.
Okay.
So anyway,
thank you.
Let that be perhaps inspiration for you, Dan, to maybe look into Rudyard Boscovich and perhaps make a connection with Roger after today's conference. I think it'd be worth your while. I think you'll enjoy his work. Okay, we are after the 2-hour mark, and as Pal noted, we had a pretty good attendance today. Over, about 55 people, I think, showed up. Some have come and gone, but that's been great. Normally, we probably have about 35, so very good. I guess what that means is we're going to have to spend more time talking about pre and and chakras and stuff like that. That's not, and throw the mathematical equations out the door because they're not as sexy. No, I'm being facetious, of course. We typically do have presentations that are more mathematical and more in that sort of realm. But this is great, and I hope it can open some doors for us to perhaps explore more presentations of this type, not only from you, but from some others in maybe the Tesla realm of our science. Maybe in a future presentation, you can give us some more emphasis on some of the experiments that you performed. I've read your books, and so I'm familiar with some of those. And that would be an area where maybe we could work together to provide some mathematical explanations for what's going on. So that's something that we can all repeat is, of course, the best. That way we can test it and actually come up with some results. So that would be my hope, maybe for a future presentation someday that we could do. Sam has made several comments. He likes this presentation, but Sam, I don't think you've come to any others, so you can't compare this to other NPA presentations. But anyway, it's great to have you here and open the door. Hope you'll join us for some of our other presentations. We have, I sent out requests to a bunch of people this week, and hopefully be scheduling quite a few here in the next week or so. 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a meeting that Duncan Shaw, Judge Duncan Shaw, will be hosting, having to do with elections of our board members directly from members. So please be here for that. And I believe we'll have someone scheduled for next week as well. So anyway, lots of great stuff coming up. Thanks for everybody for coming. Going to close out the recording now. And let me, darn, that button is so hard to get sometimes. Here we go. Stop the recording.